Welcome to Slouching Towards Masculinity. What does it mean to be a man in today's society? How are we defined and how do we define ourselves? What lessons have we learned and how do we affect others? Join me, Philip Bedwell, and guests as we discuss lifestyles and life lessons as we slouch towards masculinity together. Hello there, and welcome to the latest episode of Slouching Towards Masculinity with me, Philip Bedwell. Hope you're doing well, and I hope you've enjoyed all the conversations so far. It's been amazing recording them and listening to, my colleagues and friends and their views on masculinity, where it's come from, their upbringing, where it's going. I've had some amazing insights shared, and like I say, I really hope you're enjoying them. If you are, if you could like and or subscribe to the podcast, it'd be much appreciated. And also, if you have any feedback or any comments, there's some links in the show notes and how you can send them to me, and it would be great to hear from you. So, without further ado, let's introduce today's guest, Anick Soni. He is an intersex campaigner, and he also has an incredibly moving documentary on YouTube produced by the BBC. You can find it. It's called Anick's Intersex Diaries, or if you type in Meet Anick, spelled A-N-I-C-K, it comes up on the top of the search bar. I will also put a link in the show notes on how to find it as well. This conversation today was moving, very much like the documentary. We shared a lot of thoughts, and Anick spoke in length about his upbringing, how he identifies with masculinity, how his family identified with masculinity, how he feels his attitudes have changed now, and where he thinks masculinity and indeed identity is going. We also have a really long chat about social media and its effects on identity and how information is passed and spread and interpreted. I really hope you enjoy this conversation because I had a great time talking to Anick, and I really appreciate the time that he gave me today. So please get listening, and if you could watch that documentary as well, I think it's well worth your time. So enjoy, and I will see you next week. Okay, hello Anick, how are you doing today?
I'm pretty good. I'm in a good mood today.
Brilliant. That's what I like to hear. Well, welcome to Slouching Towards Masculinity. Thank you so much for giving me your time and being on here, because I appreciate, even though we have bags of time at the moment, it's important to everyone how it's spent. So it really does mean a lot that you'll take the time out of your day and come speak to me today.
No problem. It's going to be fun, I hope.
Yeah, no, excellent. Well, like I say, I like to keep it easy and we can just go any which way you want. So really, I sort of was going to just start off the conversation, which I sort of tend to start with everyone. We can see where we can go. Is sort of like with your growing up and sort of any sort of masculine rules or archetypes you were exposed to, how religion and culture informed your sort of idea of the masculine, your parents, and also schooling. I know that's quite a wide topic, so we can sort of dip in and out of it or come back to it or ignore it. However you want to take it.
Yeah, that is a lot. So I guess for me, straight from the offset, I can say that I view masculinity as something where there's masculinities. There are so many different versions of being a man, and you don't have to be a man to be masculine. So it took me a long time to learn all of those things, but my parents are actually from East Africa, but we have Indian heritage, and my family generally are very big on culture, and there are very big rules and things that you have to do if you're a boy, things you have to do if you're a girl, and all these different things I had to grapple with growing up. So yeah, I have been heavily influenced by this concept of masculinity and all the different ways a person can show that they're masculine since I was a kid. But I think to start with, it's worth mentioning that when I was born, it wasn't very clear straight away whether I was a boy or a girl. So that kind of put my parents on a different path, I'd say, compared to how other parents tend to raise children. So they had to make some decisions very early on, because looking at my genitalia, it wasn't clear from a medical perspective at first whether I was male or female. So it wasn't until the doctors and my parents looked at my chromosomes and said, okay, the likelihood is it's just an underdeveloped male. That's when things started to sort of push me into this direction of being more masculine. So I've always had an uneasy relationship with what it means to be male and what it means to be masculine, which stems from all of this kind of stuff. But essentially, I was always concerned with just trying to be myself. And it really made me look at stereotypes in a particular way, because I think it's safe to say we all have different stereotypes that we individually hold towards different words and different identities. So my idea of what masculine is, and the stereotypes I have, are maybe different to what your stereotypes of what masculinity are. But at the same time, I have my own stereotypes of what I think I should be like to fit in.
Yes. That's really, so I mean, to sort of go a little bit further in depth in that, what would you say are your stereotypes of masculine, and the ones that you feel are personal to you?
This is where it gets really strange, because I have stereotypes of what I would deem to be masculine, but at the same time, I don't really see many males or people in my life who tend to uphold those same things. So it's kind of like we call it a stereotype, but I don't know how true of a stereotype it is. So, for example, I know that men are meant to be tough and strong.
Yes.
And so that's the stereotype I have. But at the same time, it's something I learned very early on, that there are different ways to be tough and strong. And just because you're tough and strong doesn't make you masculine.
Yes.
So there are many different kinds of things that I would always kind of say to myself, okay, I need to be more masculine. So I need to do this, I need to do that. And it was always just very confusing, because I would watch TV, read books, and all of these different things, and I would be comparing myself to the person in that particular thing. So I would kind of derive what I think masculinity is based on all of these different fictional characters, but also the people around me.
Yes, and it's interesting as well, because I think you can be exploring through lots of, it's like, depends what sort of where you get your information from, because in time another version or another stereotype will sort of supersede the one you had before. Stereotypes and archetypes, sometimes they can have that negative connotation, but I really think it's, you find something that feels true to you, or aspects of many things you find which can be true to you, and then you weave the framework of self off of that. I mean, you already hit upon a really good point, where it's exactly the same for me growing up in East London, that strength was always very important, and having this sort of body of strong looking body, but then you also can have strength of character, strength of will. And for me, that has just become just as important now, but it's in different times of your life. It's like when you're sort of growing up, you can just see a very obvious, I don't know, a comic book reference, or for me a wrestling reference, which was just this big strong man, but then apart from having just brute strength, there wasn't really too much going on in terms of any sort of intellect or sensitivity, which now has become a lot more resonant to me as well.
And I think that's why it's easier to say masculinities as well, because it's very dependent on time and place and culture and all of these different things as well. And you can think about the very basic things that people grow up thinking now, like blue is for boys, pink is for girls, but actually it used to be the other way around. Pink used to be seen as the more manly color because it was more dominant. So attitudes change all the time, and when you're growing up, you're surrounded by people who have different attitudes and will have been through different things and have different beliefs. So you kind of create this own idea of what masculinity is in your own head and have to try and deal with how that fits in with the rest of the world.
Did you find that there was a lot of difference? Because you referenced I sort of mentioned about your culture and you sort of referenced it a little bit, but in what your parents were instilling to you about, or what you witnessed in your sort of growing up with masculine values, predisposed to what you might have sort of read in popular sort of magazines or advertisements? Did you see a lot of sort of differences or similarities at all within those two references?
So when it comes to families and culture, all of the stereotypes I used to kind of think about, where men had to be the stronger one and look after everyone, and they were the ones who were stronger and all of those things, I kind of felt like they didn't really apply to me because I was the youngest. And I had an older sister and an older brother, so I still do. Well, they kind of, I don't know, it just always felt like I was always the one being looked after. So I always felt like the rules didn't apply to me. And so I always saw strict kind of divisions in my dad. So my dad is quite a masculine person. But all of those same things that I can describe, I can also use them to describe my mum. I can say that she's very strong, and all of that as well. But I think in terms of whether she'd describe that as masculinity, I don't think she would. So it's very interesting to me how people interpret those words and apply them to different things, and how people will have their own ideas of what a man should be and what a masculine person should be, and then they judge everyone else according to their own benchmark. But then we all seem to also have this kind of what we say society thinks, forgetting that actually that's constantly changing as well.
Exactly. And I also think as well, it's like within terms of having within your own body, with having its own identity and values, you sort of have to in yourself fulfill a certain look or archetype. But then it gets to a point where you want to match what you think those values are, but then having the self-confidence to sort of forge your own path as well, because we all want to be individual and unique. You have some people who lack confidence and almost trying to become a carbon copy of something else, whereas the ones that go, okay, I can take enough of those values to sort of see myself in them, but then I want to be myself as well. I don't want to be a sort of slave to an idea of what masculinity should be.
Yeah, and in my experience, I feel most of the time it has been other people around me who have tried to make me more masculine compared to how I felt. Like, I didn't think I wasn't being masculine in particular, but other people would maybe latch onto something I did and think that wasn't masculine enough. So, like, to give you my kind of example of that, it's we see it a lot of the time when it comes to having daughters and girls and women in our lives nowadays, where we are more open to the idea of them doing things which previously would have been seen as masculine or things for boys. Whereas if it came, so for example, if you had a girlfriend and she liked sports and drinking hard drinks, loved beer and things, you'd be like, oh, that's cool, I like that. Whereas that same standard on a guy or someone who's male is kind of different. So if you have a boyfriend and he likes dance and maybe prefers fruity drinks, you think, oh, that's not very masculine. So it's like we all have this strange idea of what should be, and it's like masculinity is the best thing you can possibly be. But there's like a new kind of masculinity, because we're not living in hunter-gatherer societies anymore, where strength used to be the only way you could prove dominance. Nowadays, it's also about your creativity and all of the other things that you need to survive in a modern world. So it's strange to me to constantly feel like there's a battle between trying to make yourself seem more masculine and not having any other side to you.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. Because we now also another point with the whole hunter gatherer sort of society as well. You had a lot less time to think and be creative and sort of express other sides of yourself. You had to fulfill significant definitive role within inside that hierarchy to still be of use to the tribe. Now, because certain essential needs are met automatically, we have a bit more well, hopefully have a bit more spare time to actually consider who we are, what defines us, and actually develop that idea of self a little bit more and what it means to be masculine.
Yeah.
I was going to mention as well, you said about like when someone would see you do something or see, where it can be seen not as masculine or what they would not to be, what not that they would not to perceive to be masculine, but and that can sort of it doesn't sort of work within them. But do you think sometimes this could be a sort of like an issue with their own self-identity? I often find when people are very sort of outspoken about what they consider the rules to be, so to speak, that if someone steps slightly outside them, they're almost scared, because if they're interested in it as well, it makes them question their values, and suddenly they're going to see a shift of change of what they are in themselves as well.
Absolutely. I think people get so uncomfortable when things are out of the ordinary for them. So if they're used to things being in a particular way, if someone challenges that or someone goes away from that, it's kind of, okay, well, something's wrong with you and you need to change what you're doing. I don't need to change the way I'm thinking. It's all about you. But actually, you're right. It's more about themselves. It's more about how they're seeing things. And I don't know what it is, but people just really fixate on other people more than they care about themselves. It's like, don't worry about what the person down the street is doing unless it's harming you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Or even if it is causing any harm to you at all. Like I say, I think this idea, for me, I'm going to take it away from masculine and feminine. I think having the strength to constantly self-question, self-adjust is one of the most strongest things you can do. It's there. There's that point where you want to have a definite idea of self, but also understanding that the idea of self is always going to be changing. I mean, I remember myself in my early 30s, in my early 20s, in my teens, and that person has changed a great deal. There's going to be similarities there. There's going to be commonalities. We always have a shared history, but probably my mindset and what I'm into now has changed radically. And I think that's important. I don't know, is that if the idea for me that if someone lives their whole life and everything has just been the same throughout their whole life, there's been no opportunity of growth, that almost feels like a life half lived for me.
Yeah, and I'm 25 now, and people generally tend to view other people my age and people younger than me as what Piers Morgan would describe as snowflakes. Who apparently we get upset by everything and we're just offended by everything. But the irony in that is, it's usually people like Piers Morgan who are complaining and being offended by the fact that we're so offended. So it's just like a whole cycle of offense. It's like, why do you care so much? Just let me live my life and you live yours.
Precisely. And I think the other thing as well for me with that is it almost shuts down any idea of debate. It's very nice if you can categorize something into a soundbite. So snowflake generation, boomer, lagerlout, lad, whatever bracket you want to give it. And then at the end of the day, it's like, oh, you are not like me. You've instantly made them the other. And if you can just build up fear or just dislike of the other, then you just give it that name and you don't want to interact with it. And I think that's the saddest thing for me. It's about having that interactiveness, having those conversations where you can learn about each other and then become something else. When everything gets shut down and categorized into one thing and you're either that or you're not, that then removes a great deal of what could be happening in terms of growth and acceptance.
Yeah, and there are so many other factors that come into it. So if you are out for dinner with someone and then they maybe start burping or farting or something, and like, see where I'm going with this. It sounds a bit weird, but
no, go for it. I'm with it. I'm on it.
I was just thinking about a time where I was with a female member of my family, and she started she burped, and then I just looked at her like, you are so disgusting. And she was like, what, if I was a guy you wouldn't say that? And I was like, yes I would, because it was just impolite and disgusting. And how did you make that burp sound wet? Like, that is whereas for other people it might be like, oh, okay, no, you have to, being a man is all about doing all those kind of things. It's like, no, it's just what you call it. It's so random, and it really depends on how you see the world. So there are so many different ways that a person can be masculine, and there are so many different ways a person can be feminine.
And also as well, it's whether that masculine or feminine value resonates with you. It's how in your upbringing, how that is going to affect you. Like the whole burping and farting thing, the only time I really see that, I have seen that while I was still working in London. And what it happens a lot of the time, you'll get that from some upper management. Well, they'll do it because they know they're doing it in the fact that no one will dare speak out because it's actually disgusting, it's rude. And they're doing it to just test that power boundary. They're doing it because they can. And it's just arrogance and ignorance. But yeah, I have been in situations where people fart and they think it's the funniest thing ever. You know, it very depends what company you're in and what is expected in that company as well.
Yeah, I mean, my dad does it all the time, wherever he is, no matter who he's with. And it's just, he's like, oh, well, it's involuntary, you can't stop it. Whereas if I do that in front of my mum, she just look at me and probably come and smack me or something. She's like, don't be disgusting.
I think this is taking an interesting turn. No, I think for me as well, it's sort of like how someone behaves directly afterwards. If someone does like a burp or a fart and they immediately go, huh, and then, or they're just, or, you know, just being very arrogant about it, like you're not going to say anything, that's when it gets my back up. So if it's sort of got an apology behind it, then I'm like, okay, yeah, it can be a little bit involuntary, especially when I go to the gym and stuff. It does happen, but you know, it's sort of like how it's sort of met, to be honest with you. But yeah, it's yeah, that sort of display of, I don't know, just scatological sort of body noises can sort of show, oh, I'm being a man, I'm being outspoken. It's just anyone can do it. It's just some people
I don't know why, but it's just I work a lot with children, and it's this whole idea boys will be boys. So like if a boy does burp or something, it's like, oh, okay, he's just being a boy. But if a girl burps, I've literally been in the company of a parent who said, that's not very ladylike, is it? And I'm just like, seriously?
And that boys will be boys one is a tremendously loaded statement as well, because it almost gives like someone carte blanche to behave to those toxic stereotypes. Oh, just being a boy, just being a lad, it's just who I am. And it's like, no, question it, because that's not who you are. You're just using it as a sort of almost a get out of jail free card. Who actually are you? Because everybody's unique and individual.
Yeah.
And
what has being a boy got to do with whatever you just did? So, yeah, you're right. Question it.
Exactly. Quite, you know, really, this is it. I think my attitude would be just get as many different references, cultural ideologies, histories, whatever you can do, and just pack it all into a way that speaks to you. And then always be checking it as well. Like, okay, is this something I'm still into?
That's so much work and so much effort. And most people I know tend to have already done it, because I come from one of those groups that will go and research and read and do all these things. But my brother wouldn't necessarily do the same thing. And he generally will just probably be the boys will be boys kind of thing. And the way he will see it is like, why does it affect you so much if I want to behave like that or act like that? And it's kind of just like, well, if you don't question these things and if you don't actually look into it, you're kind of just perpetuating the stereotype. So yes, it's not a problem for you individually, but it causes problems for people around you.
Yes. And then it's almost just been like someone not wanting to speak out, almost they just have to accept that behavior, and they could internally be feeling, no, this isn't what I really agree with, but having that confidence to sort of step out, especially if you're in a group environment, and say, oh, I don't actually agree with that, can be scary for an individual, because that almost ties back into a group mentality thing, or a tribal mentality thing, that if you speak out, you could be isolated. If you're isolated, you're at threat, at risk. So people don't want to step out of line or mention that they may not agree with it.
Yeah, and so because I was the youngest in my family, I'm the youngest in my generation, really. So the only people who are younger than me are my cousin's kids. So a lot of the time growing up, I spent most of the time with my mum and my aunts and really the women of the family, instead of the men in the family. I found that had a very big impact on the way I saw things, because I would find it strange that I don't know if it's cultural or whether it's just my family. That tends to be the problem with many things in my life. I don't know whether it's just something that's normal in society or it's just something my family does. But whenever there's like a big family event or something like that, it's the children will eat first, then the men will eat, and then the women always last. And I don't know whether it's an Asian thing or it's just my family and it's just how it is, but I'd always find it strange, because there was always this idea that the men who did none of the work in the kitchen, because they never wanted to learn how to cook or anything like that, they were never expected to, they could always just enjoy the food and do whatever they wanted, whereas the women would have to cook, clean, and everything like that. And when I think I was like 10 or 11, my mum taught me how to cook. And I remember some of my uncles and people thinking that was very weird that I was learning how to cook. And then my mum just said, well, shouldn't everyone know how to feed themselves? Do you really want to be a 40-year-old person who's relying on someone else to cook for them? And I was like, well, yeah, no, I don't want to be. Whereas, like, nowadays, my dad actually cooks as well. So my dad's learned how to cook many different dishes, instead of just, like, the barbecue or the standard one dish that every dad knows how to cook. He's doing most of the cooking at home when my mum's working. So gradually, even within my own family, I'm starting to see what I describe as progress. But I wonder if his friends would see it the same way, because his friends, I don't know what it is, but I think it's just this kind of mentality you have where everyone else is the other. But when I compare my dad to other people's dads and things like that, I always think my dad is different. So, like, my dad can do everything that's super manly, but now he can cook as well. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
Like, if I had a flat, I can't drive, but that's another thing. If I had a flat tire or something, I know that I could just get my dad and he'd do it. Whereas my dad would be annoyed that I'm even asking him, because I should know how to do it myself. But there are some people who, I don't know, it's just, my dad's always seems like someone who can do everything. In it, and that really influenced my masculinity in a way. Except for he isn't very book smart. He's more other smart.
So yeah, just sort of in the school of life, like graduated in the school of life. So just has a more of a doing mind rather than Well, and
even that itself, I used to, when I was younger, see that as a man thing. And the more I went to school and the more I studied humanities and other things like that, because I come from a working class background, it felt like what I was doing wasn't masculine, because my peers weren't necessarily doing the same things. So I can't drive or change a tire or fix a boiler or something, which my dad can do, and yet somehow I feel like I'm smarter. It's like, no, I'm just smarter in a different way. And that's how I kind of see masculinity. Like, no, I'm just masculine in a different way. Because I don't know, I wouldn't, me, and I don't know if you would describe me as masculine, but I wouldn't say I'm very, like, I don't know how I'd describe my relationship with any of this stuff. I'm just rambling now.
I really like it. I mean, there's a couple of things. The thing about the men eating straight after the children, I was just trying to reference that back where that could come from. And the only thing that was sort of coming up in my head was about when people used to hunt the meat. So the job for the men, so to speak, was being the hunting. And because they've done the hunting, they wouldn't do the cooking. They sort of bring the catch home. But then that has changed now because no one really has to hunt their food very much anymore. That's the only reason I could think where that sort of came from. But
maybe it is the same thing. Maybe it's because the men are supposed to be the ones who are buying the food, and then it's just stuck
the provider.
How things are. But you see it in many religious settings where the men and women are separated.
Yes.
And I think if you spoke to me maybe 10 years ago, or when I was 15, or like maybe even 20 years ago when I was 5, all my ideas would constantly be evolving and changing when it comes to thinking about what masculinity is. And I think that's the only thing that's normal, constantly changing what you see as masculine, and no longer seeing it as one fixed thing, because it can be so dangerous to just see it as, okay, I have to behave like this only. Because for me, I always thought, well, do they behave like that when they're on their own? Like, is that just who they are?
Well, and this
is that a performance?
Yeah, exactly. Are you just, because this is it? It's sort of almost, for me, if you liken it to that, it almost becomes a checklist. And if you are living up to a set idea of masculinity that someone else has given you or you have been taught, you're always going to be failing. You're never going to be able to completely live up to it, or you're going to have to fake it to almost, it's that, because everybody is going to be unique and individual and growing and changing. So when you meet these people where they're sort of like away. So I've just got a call. I'm going in the background. If you sort of meeting people where they aren't living up to it, or you feel like this very set idea, away from it, they might be so rigid in that thought process, they're not going to change from it at all? Or do they want to question it at all? Or have they so indoctrinated into their mind that that's it, that's all they can ever be? They've got no chance of self-growth at all.
Yeah, and you kind of get that spilling over into many different jobs, and also things you're supposed to like when it comes to movies, when it comes to artists. And there seems to be these divisions that, okay, only girls can like this, only boys can like this. If you're a boy who likes this thing, which is considered girly, you're not very masculine automatically. And I always found that strange, because when it comes to things like maybe doing drama or something,
yes,
being in a film, you can't automatically say, okay, well, people in film wear makeup, so all people in films are clearly not masculine because they have to wear makeup, because you're associating wearing makeup with being feminine. And it's just, people don't always think things through. Like, they don't have a very circular logic, so they'll is that the right word?
Yeah, it's right.
Like, they will say something and believe it, but they won't actually finish that thought, where it's like, okay, now you've made that connection, what about this?
Yeah, it's that in a way, it's sort of almost like a negative thing. It's like I was saying, you take the bits that resonate with you and then just sort of disregard the bits that aren't. But you can also use that in a very sort of negative sense, that you just use the bits that work for your argument and then just ignore the bits that don't. Exactly, you don't mention it. But one thing I was going to sort of go into as well was social media and masculinity. And this is sort of like, is this a sort of positive way of enforcing knowledge about self? And because it really does seem to be the way of sort of how we're educated now in self-belief and positive role models, if they're positive. And do you think this is perpetuating it, or is this something that you feel like it's almost perpetuating a capitalist model of something we can never live up to, or is it very much dependent on the individual?
I feel like it's all of those things, because when it comes to who you follow on social media, it's very much a curated feed of people you've chosen to follow. But at the same time, that doesn't mean you like all of their content. And there might be particular models or actors or fitness gurus who you think, okay, yeah, I'm going to follow them because I like their content. But then if you keep seeing their content over and over and over again, and it becomes, because our feeds are then changed to show us more of what they think we like, we're only seeing one kind of thing. And so if I am following a bunch of people who are physically fit, Instagram or whatever other social media platform I'm using thinks, okay, this person likes fitness, we need to show them more of this, and never show them the other side or show them other bodies. And that really does have an impact, because you tend to see only one kind of person or one kind of post, and it's very unhealthy. But at the end of the day, you're the one who's curating that feed. But
yes,
I still think that because of the way algorithms work, there needs to be more checks and balances that maybe social media companies can do, so that you don't get bombarded with lots of ads for fuel or like some other kind of protein or whatever it is that makes you feel bad about yourself. And it amazes me how many times people follow other people because they like the way they look, but then that's it. They're not actually learning anything from them, or other than having, maybe that's what social media is for them though. Who knows?
I mean, and the way sort of social media is lent towards at the moment, it's all quick stuff. It's just a quick picture or a quick 140 characters, something that's very consumable, gives a little sort of rush of dopamine, and then you're off to the next thing. It's got to be very instantaneous, and really that's someone that they have to, what you said there, is sort of question yourself, because unfortunately a lot of the algorithms aren't going to be to help someone or improve someone or give someone a complete sense. It's either really like what you've just said, reinforcing past ideas, or trying to sell you something. And if you're complete, if you buy that one thing and you're complete, then you're not going to buy anything else. So it needs to perpetuate a need rather than perpetuate a sense of fullness and completeness.
And here's the other thing: if I'm following someone because I like their workouts or something, they're not, and I know this, they're not actually sharing their whole workout with you. So you might see one picture of them with their incredible body, but you don't know how much work has gone into that, what they're depriving themselves of, how much they're sleeping, what they're eating. So you're not seeing all of the hard work that goes into that image, or the fact that those images might just be edited anyway. Forget that part. We're only being shown a glimpse of something each time. And it's the same thing with masculinity. If you are constantly surrounding yourself by, if you're watching a film and it's got a very macho guy in it, you're watching some old film or whatever it is, that's only an hour of someone's life. It's not their whole life. And anyone who lives with someone can tell you, even you can know about yourself, you're never just one thing. No. So when it comes to things like social media, you're never being shown the full image, and we only show people what we want them to see in a way.
Yeah, and I think for me, the positive side of social media is information can be shared a lot quicker, can be transferred a lot quicker. You can have conversations with people a lot quicker, but that can sometimes you can get stuck in just a confirmation bias bubble. But the negative side of it is, you're just getting these same images repeated to you that will always build up a sense of, I can never be enough. And that's what you have to be careful of and sort of fall back from as well. You're very right. I mean, from my experience in the fitness modeling world, where I've worked with them and stuff as well, some of them are just genetically gifted, and it's impossible to look like that. There's no secret sort of thing they're doing. It's just lots of hard work. But if they showed you all that hard work, and like you say, some of the negative aspects of what having to look like that all the time brings, it would not interest a lot of people. Suddenly the dream, this unbelievable thing that you want, isn't so perfect, because at the end of the day, nothing is perfect. You've just got to be perfect and accepting in yourself rather than trying to be this other thing.
Yeah, and for the past year, what I've been doing is research into children's attitudes towards masculinity. So I'm in the past, and occasionally I babysit for children, and what I've learned is that there is so much content out there that children can consume at different stages, and we don't always know what they're seeing or how it's impacting them unless we ask. And so even when it comes to the fact that 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds are easily accessing porn, that's also, we have many conversations about the impact on women, but we don't necessarily talk about how it impacts little boys seeing this kind of material, seeing what a man is supposed to do, supposed to look like, and all of these other things in these adult videos. And it's the same thing with, if you look at the computer games. Oh my god, I sound so old. Computer games, video games, you know what I mean.
No, I still call them, I just went quiet there because I was like, I still call them computer games.
I don't know what they call them. I don't know.
Console games.
Yeah, even like the games on people's phones. If you look at the ridiculous body shapes and attitudes of these characters, it's just unbelievable. Watch Disney Channel or Nickelodeon or any of these things, watch these cartoons, and even the kids have these ridiculous six-packs, and you're just like, what?
Yes.
And we're unconsciously taking all of this in all of the time. And it's why when I was younger, I tended to prefer books, because they wouldn't write, oh, he was a 10-year-old with a six-pack and everyone fancied him. They wouldn't write that. But when you are watching a cartoon and there's a popular kid in there who looks like they have everything they want, you associate that with all of those things.
That's fair. I think that's, to be honest with you, that's where books are so important, and the written word is so important, because your mind gets its own chance to be unique and fill in the gaps. When someone is the hero and there's not a big explanation of what they look like, or there's just some general like vagueness, then your mind gets a chance to work and be creative and create that person. Whereas, like you say, when it's just imprinted on the screen, there's no room for what could they be. That's exactly what, that's the archetype, that's the show of hypermasculinity, and that's all it can be. And then unfortunately that informs your imagination, as opposed to, if you're reading, your imagination informs the text.
Yeah, and all of those pictures and videos that get all these likes, it's getting affirmations and getting all this validation that you then want yourself. So think about the most popular app right now for young people is TikTok, and I don't understand it. I mean, I've downloaded it and then got rid of it, because most of the popular TikToks, is that what they're even called, the videos, end up on my Instagram feed or Twitter feed anyway, so I don't even need the app. But when I'm looking at this stuff, all I can see is people that are younger than me who have all of these like perfect lives, it seems like, all of these different ways that I'm not. And that ties in a lot with how you view yourself. And if you're not having kind of conversations with yourself, or if you're not surrounded by people who show you the love and affection you need growing up, or even when you are growing up, you end up building this idea that you're never going to be good enough, and so you're never going to be masculine enough, you're never going to be this, you're never going to be that, and you have to constantly work at being the best. Because what you said with your guest in your last episode about in wrestling, when people are because they want the bad guy to lose so that they can feel happy when the good guy wins, all of that kind of stuff. We didn't get that in childhood, because whenever we watched all these TV shows and things like that, it just seemed like the bad guy always got everything, or in real life the bully always seems to win.
Well, yeah, it's a very good point. This is it. Is for me as well. in sort of popular culture, you have to set up the villain because there has to be a struggle. And for me, that is the true point of what I've come to realize now with masculinity is that there to be if there's no struggle, if there's no sense of vulnerability, if there's no sense that you can show a weakness and you might not be able to make it, then there's no real in with someone. There's not a strong bond, or you'll never have a strong relationship with them. It's sort of something for TikTok. It's like anyone can be perfect for 15 seconds. I liken it very much to the Vine thing as well, that it's something that sort of zips in and out. But if you allow that to build up on yourself, it's just something that's very McDonald's, just instant feed me and gone, just zip, quick click. Whereas to have a stronger resonance and something that you'll go back to and something that will link to you for a lot longer, you have to almost go on a journey with someone. And to go on a journey with someone, it just can't be one note and perfect. There has to be a struggle. There has to be a loss in somewhere. There has to be a change in character, a learning, an adventure. Otherwise, it never sticks. Does that sort of make sense? Or
yeah, we all need to let go of these extremes that we have. So it's like when we're talking about different ways of being, you can carve that out for yourself. There is not just one way to be a guy. There is not just one way to be someone who is popular or something. There are different ways you can do things, and because my parents are Indian and I grew up in the UK, in Leicester, I often found myself consuming not only British and American content, but also consuming Bollywood and Indian content a lot as well. But across all of those different cultures, I was still seeing extremes of what masculinity is. So it felt like whenever I was watching like a Bollywood film, there was always the tough guy who every girl fancied, everyone wanted to be with, every guy wanted to be. And that same story was the same in the British shows that I would watch or the American shows I'd watch. But you'd never see the middle people. You'd never see people who are just different ways of being. And I always wondered why that was the case.
Yeah. I don't have an answer to that. It's only, I just guess
Why don't you have the answers?
I don't know. It's an interesting. It's sort of like you say. There's just these same stories that are told over and over again, and the archetypes that people fit to. But
yeah, and that's fine if you fit to it and you're happy like that. But don't force that on everyone else as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Or make them feel that there's somehow it's fine. Or if they feel like they're not measuring up, that's fine. But just don't make them feel that they're lesser because they can't. Or, there should be some negativity that you just can't do that thing. Everyone is going to be good at something. Everybody can do what they can do. They are the best at being them. And that's what people, without getting all sort of self-helpy and stuff, that's what people sort of need to remember. Be the best at being you, as opposed to you are not measuring up with this TikTok or this whatever vision of masculinity or the perfect self you are, because you can't reach that. That's the whole point. The thing is, it's just going on the journey and having a struggle of it. Yeah.
And it's interesting that when people have ideals, they don't actually question why they have that ideal. So okay, yes, you want to be really fit, but why do you want to be fit? Is it because you want to be healthier?
Yes.
Okay, if you want to be healthier, why are you taking steroids to be healthier? Or is it because you just want someone to like you? Okay, well, what else can you do to make someone like you? It's all of these questions that it's a shortcut to just jump towards a stereotype, because stereotypes are familiar. So it's easier for you to kind of fall into the ideal, or it's not even an ideal, it's the expected.
Well, it's almost unpicking that one stage further as well, and even saying to people, well, why is that your idea of fit? Like you can even go further. Why have they got? Because what we mentioned earlier on about having that person who what are they like away from the crowd? Do they actually question anything? When people have such ingrained ideas of self-belief, anything that doesn't fit into those ideas of what they are, they don't even recognize them. They, like you just mentioned, having that time to actually question why they have these beliefs. Most people won't even do that.
Yeah, and growing up, I wanted to kind of be more masculine to fit in. So I joined karate and I joined scouts and all of these things that would surround me by other guys, so that I could maybe be like them. But all it taught me was that everyone is actually pretty different, and the only way I will be happy is if I just focus on what makes me happy, not on what makes them happy.
I was actually going to mention that as well, because I watched your BBC documentary as well. I thought it was amazing. It was really, really powerful. And you mentioned in that about fitting in, and I was, it's like where you feel the line is between sort of wanting that support around you and wanting having that sense of like people that have stuff in common with you, but also still being able to be independent and being like self-assured as well. It's like having that need and that, you've got someone's got your back, like a sense of family, but at the same time, they're not going to turn against you if you suddenly want to grow as a person as well.
Yeah, I always had, from my, I don't know actually. I was about to say I've always had a sense of acceptance from my own family, but I'm not entirely sure. It's more they would just kind of put up with it, whatever I ended up doing, and they still do. We don't tend to have these big conversations unless I do something, and then they need to have the conversation. But when it came to trying to fit in, I don't know what it is, but I think everyone wants to fit in somewhere, and when you have an idea of who you think is the best person to be, you kind of want to get there. And so I'm intersex, and that's not necessarily part of the LGBT community. Like, just because you're intersex doesn't mean you're attracted to someone of the same gender or sex. But I've always felt part of the LGBT community because of other reasons, like the fact that we just tend to be all misfits who don't fit into the straight, normal, quote unquote, world. And so even when you look at the queer community and people within that community, there are so many different communities that exist within it. And there is, again, ideas of masculinity. And you have big conversations all the time about what it means to be masculine if you're gay, what it means to be masculine if you're bisexual, and if you're a lesbian, can you be masculine, or is it then called something else? Is it called being butch? And there are all of these very complex conversations that are constantly happening, and it's just like it messes with your head. And I think one of the reasons masculinity is so prized is because of the patriarchy. The way that the world is set up and designed is for masculinity to thrive. So
yes.
Even within the gay community, where there are many gay men who grew up being told they weren't masculine enough or something like that, but then when they found the gay community, if they ever do, the same kind of stereotypes battle within that. It's like, you have to be masculine, you have to be this, we don't like feminine guys. And so it's very difficult, and I don't know where I'm even going with this. I'm sorry, Phil.
No, not at all. It's sort of ties into what I was actually going to ask you, where you thought the future of masculinity would be, and it almost defeats itself, like we were mentioning earlier on with labels, that wanting to find yourself or wanting to find that common. You almost said it with the scouts as well, that people want to find, okay, this is who I am, this is what I am. But then when you meet that group, they're all different. So you realize, as much as you've got something in common with a group, you are your own unique individual. And we all are on our own paths. We all have our own consciousness. And sort of just taking those points of masculinity that work for you, or those points of identity that work for you, even if you get away from masculinity, but at the same time not regimenting yourself to trying to feel that you're lesser or wanting to be something you're not, and letting in that lessen your life because you feel like you're not complete in some way.
Yeah, for me, I look at the future of masculinity being pretty much all encompassing. There is just going to be a more fluid approach to it where you can define it how you want to. And hopefully one day we'll get rid of the toxic parts of every kind of identity. We hear the phrase toxic masculinity a lot. I'm sure it will come up on your show with different guests many times. But what does that actually mean? What parts of it are toxic? And when does it stop being toxic? And when can you have those same feelings and make it healthier? Because the way I see it is that every single human has masculinity and femininity within them.
Yes.
And that doesn't make you one or the other. You can't always be one or the other. There is no binary way of looking at it. It's throughout different moments in life, you will feel different ways. And it's all about these expectations you build and have. And I just hope we don't pass on warped sense of belonging or who you're supposed to be on to more children. Since I came out as intersex, everyone in my family and also family friends and things, anytime they see anything remotely gender related, they'll send it to me just because they think I'll be really interested in it, even if I'm not. So for example, I'll have people sending me photos of like their nephews wearing a dress or something for fancy dress, or they'll be like, look how progressive we are. And it's like, stop getting I'm not going to give you validation. If your child was happy wearing that, fair enough, great, cool, that's it. But it's this, I don't know, I just hope the future of masculinity is just a lot less strict. Do you remember one of the first things we went to, you and I, was the workshop
Transmission roundhouse thing? Yeah.
And one of the tasks they made us do was cut out different parts of magazines to reflect on what the future of masculinity would be. And you know, the strangest thing happened when I was in my group. I can't remember whether you were in my group, but we all ended up kind of coming to an agreement where we all picked bits we all liked and put it in without feeling like we had to defend our choices or anything like that. For the people who did want what other people would see as stereotypes, we didn't argue with it. We were just like, cool, that's what you want. It's not what I want, but all right. And that's what I hope the future is. Different ways of being you.
Yeah, and an acceptance of that as well. I mean, I was going to mention that, but yeah, that night in Camden was so interesting to me, because the most important thing wasn't the results, but more that those conversations were happening. And when you just put a group of men into a room together like that, that everything just seemed to be quite, you know, nothing was off the table. And that's what, yeah.
Because we didn't have any rules. They didn't say there were no women. It was people who identified as male, and it just who identified as boys, whatever you want to say. Yeah. But it was just, okay, guys generally don't tend to have this conversation alone, but if masculinity is something that needs saving or fixing or changing, why not have the conversation? Why leave it to everyone else if we're not having the conversation as men ourselves? Yeah. And I thought that's what was fantastic about the whole thing. And I would love different versions of that to happen just all the time. There's a charity that goes around doing that in schools, the Good Lad Initiative, and there are a few others that are similar, where men will go into classrooms and talk about masculinity to little boys and little girls and other people generally, and just see what happens. And what you tend to find is we're all on a journey of trying to figure out what is and isn't who we want to be. But what we all need to learn is that we should kind of, in a way, for lack of a better phrase, be more selfish with it. Like when it comes to wanting to do things, do it for you. That doesn't mean disregard other people, but don't change who you are to fit in with other people. Do it because you want to do it.
Yeah. And having that strength of will and strength of self-identity that you are going to do it as well. Yeah. Oh, I think that's absolutely amazing. I think that is a great way to end it as well. I mean, we've covered a lot today, and I really, really appreciate it. You've given me a lot to think upon. I mean, the major reason I started this podcast up was to start these conversations, and it's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you. But I was going to ask, is there anything you'd like to give out where people can follow you, or any information you'd like to give out at all?
So if you want to watch my documentary, it's called The Intersex Diaries, and you can find it on YouTube. And I am at Anickians, ANICKIANS.
Perfect. That's absolutely wonderful. Well, listen, thank you so much once again. A lot to think about and a lot to take away. And excellent. I will speak to you soon.
Great. Thanks. Bye.
Take care. Bye. You have been listening to Slouching Towards Masculinity with me, Philip Bedwell. You can follow me on Instagram at Philip Bedwell. That's 1 L in the Philip and 2 in the Bedwell. Or you can also visit my website at www.philipbedwell.com. Thank you.